Hi everybody and welcome. I promised I would be coming on here live, and so here I am for the first in this series of Inclusion Differently. Let's get started. Well, hello everybody, and thank you if you're tuning in. This is me, Jackie Handy, and this is the first of the episode series that I'm going to be covering on Inclusion Differently. And if you saw the trailer, then you'll know that a lot of what we're going to be talking about are things that are included in my book. It's there on the shelf, but I'll show it you here as well. This is it, the Little Book of Belonging, and it's your weekly guide to inclusive habits. Now, I know some people watching will have a copy. Because I'm streaming this out to friends only, I won't be able to see your comments, by the way, in the chat, but do please give me some hearts if you're there, say hello if you're there, and of course if you've got any questions then do pop those in the chat as well, and I'll be sure to come back to you. But the Little Book of Belonging basically has a question and a reflection for every single week of the year. So if you haven't already got a copy and you want to grab yourself one, then do hop over to jackiehandy.com/shop and you'll be able to find your copy there. And if you've already got a copy, then first of all, thank you for buying that and supporting this. But today we're going to be talking about ways then that you can start really bringing that to life. Now, I was very explicit when I wrote the book not to just define you must do this, this and this, because when it comes to inclusion and when it comes to humanity, we are all so very different, and as I like to say, we all have our own unique map of the world. So what I'm going to do really is just talk about some of the things to consider which will kind of help you along this journey, especially if you're just starting out on your path towards a greater sense of inclusion. I can see a few hearts and thumbs ups and things like that coming through. I can't see your comments, but I can see those, so thank you, and do keep those coming. For those of you that might be watching on replay, please just put replay in the chat as well. I'm going to be streaming this across Facebook, but also onto LinkedIn, and it'll be posted on YouTube if you want to re-watch later. Okay, well, let's get started then. So the first question that is posed in the book is this one. So it's did I last take time to sit with a friend or colleague to understand their values? Now, values, you might think, well, what's that got to do with inclusion? But in fact, values and our personal core values have everything to do with inclusion, because they shape us. They shape the way in which we see the world, and they shape the way in which we demonstrate our values in our behaviours, our actions, and indeed our language. So they're a huge part of the inclusion journey. So you might be sat there thinking, well, actually, it's not sort of question that I would typically ask of my friends or my colleagues, because I don't perhaps know where to start. Well, let's just think first of all about what values truly are and where they come from. So they're almost like our underlying DNA, if you like, that are formed generally really early on in our lives. They probably come from our family units, our upbringing, perhaps our culture or religious beliefs as we're growing up. And we kind of take those on board and we internalize those. And the key thing here is that actually our values are often not immediately apparent to those around us, unless somebody does something that kind of contradicts those values, because that's when we really start noticing it, and actually can cause us quite a bit of distress and discontentment. And the other thing about values is, if you're watching and you're in the corporate world, then your corporate values and the personal values of the employees within it, if there's not some kind of alignment, then you'll probably find that the people within your organisation are maybe feeling a little bit demotivated, maybe there's a lack of engagement, and it's not always immediately apparent why. But when you then look around at your organisational values, maybe they're a poster on the wall, maybe they're something that is found on your website. But unless those values are truly being brought to life in the way in which you run your organisation, and especially the leadership within those organisations are really living and breathing those values down the line, then you'll find that the people within your business who have perhaps been attracted into your organisation because there's some kind of value alignment amongst other things, and then they come on board into your organisation and realise that somehow there's a bit of a misalignment here. It doesn't feel quite right. And just as I said before, sometimes we can't really put our finger on what that is. It just doesn't feel right. It's interesting, isn't it? And so if you've got a high turnover of staff, if you've got lower engagement, or indeed lower levels of productivity and your profit is suffering, then it might be that actually the values that you're advertising on your websites or on your posters are not the values that your internal employees are actually seeing come to life in what's been lived and breathed throughout the organisation. So let's go back really in terms of what is the importance about understanding values in an organisation from a personal perspective. So just really think about this and how you can actually look to uncover somebody's values. And maybe it's useful for you to think about how you could uncover your own values first, because if you've kind of gone through this journey, it becomes much more easy to help somebody else along that journey as well. And sometimes when it comes to inclusion and really helping somebody feel valued and giving them a true sense of belonging, it's quite important to be a little bit vulnerable yourself and maybe open up to somebody else first. And then you're much more likely to get that reciprocal conversation going and deepen that relationship. So I ask you, what are your core values? I have a great friend called Paul Tavala. I'll give him a mention because he talks about core values and he refers to them as your non-negotiables. And I really love that because, as I mentioned, sometimes we can't see our personal core values unless somebody contradicts those in a behaviour that they demonstrate or even the language that they use. And that's when we realise something doesn't feel right and I feel like my core sense is being compromised. And that's probably because there's a misalignment in those values once again. So give some thought to when do you feel at your best? What is it that gives you energy? What do you aspire to in your life, and where does that come from? Because it could be that links back to the values that were set out for you very early on in your life. And you know, if you're like me, I often catch myself these days saying something or doing something and I go, God, I'm just like my mum or just like my dad. And that could be a way that actually those instilled values start coming to life through my behaviour and my language. So maybe you have the same. And, you know, I'm not here to go through a workshop to talk about how you can uncover your core values. There's plenty of stuff on the internet, or there's plenty of people that you can speak to about that. And I am happy, of course, to help on a one-to-one or one-to-many basis if you need. But once you've uncovered those, you get a really deep sense of how it feels when you can be in an environment that truly allows you to live and breathe your core values every single day. And that gives you satisfaction. It's going to help you feel much more engaged in whatever you're doing, and therefore you're likely to be much more productive in what you're doing. So once you've established that, you can then start engaging with those people around you, whether they're friends or whether they're colleagues, to dig a bit deeper into their core values. And just in case you're just logging in to watch this, I'm going to put this back on the screen. This is the first quote, or the first question in the Little Book of Belonging, and it's: when did I last take the time to sit with a friend or colleague to truly understand their values? What often happens in the relationships that we form is that we kind of, unless we really get under the skin of people, those relationships remain quite superficial. And we may find ourselves having passing conversations with somebody, and how are you, and what have you been up to, and these kind of conversations. But they're not really going deep under the surface. And if you're a manager or somebody in an organisation and you really want to get to know what makes your employees tick, so that you can seek to create an environment that truly allows for that sense of inclusion and belonging and value, then really getting under the skin of their core values is the way forward. So there's a couple of things that I would urge you to really think about when you're looking to uncover an individual's core values. And they're quite deep conversations, these can be. So it's not just as simple as going along to somebody over a coffee and saying, hey, I was wondering, I haven't really ever talked to you about your core values. What are they? Because that's just going to fall flat. And we want these quality conversations. Remember, the intention behind this exercise, really, and the journey towards an inclusive world where we all feel as though we belong, is to really take the time to go deeper. Remember, we all have our own unique map of the world, and that shapes us, and the values that we have within our core are a massive part of that. So there's a couple of things, a couple of words. They are just words, but boy, they are important words to bear in mind. And the first is this: intention. So you really want to make sure that when you're engaging in conversations with somebody and starting to instigate these very powerful conversations, that you first present your positive intention for the conversation. So just as the great speaker Simon Sinek would say, you can't simply say to someone, trust me, and they will. In the same way, when it comes to belonging, you can't simply say to someone, you belong, and they will feel it. So it has to be that journey of discovery. It may take time, but it takes ongoing commitment. And that's why I believe in this pathway through small steps. And if we're all taking small steps consistently, we will start to make change. But intention is huge. So being able to explain to somebody that the reason for you instigating a conversation around core values, it needs to be that the focus is about developing and deepening that relationship you have with them, in order that you can potentially adapt and refine the behaviors that you're demonstrating and the language that you're using with them each and every day, in order that you can support them in creating an environment for them that enables them to truly feel inside them that they have a place of value in your life and that they truly belong. Does this make sense? And the second thing then is, okay, next word, permission. Permission is super important as well. So once again, you couldn't simply say, my intention is to help you, my intention is to work to create this environment that supports your values, that enables you to be the best version of yourself and truly feel like you're included and you belong. But we now need to ask permission to get into that conversation. And if you know much about psychological safety, well, we'll be covering that in later episodes. But to create a psychologically safe environment for someone is also hugely important. And that basically means an environment where, nothing is off limits. Everything can be discussed, and you will listen without judgment. That is super important. Remember, it may not be that your values are the same as somebody else's values, but the intention behind these conversations then is to truly seek not to judge, not to speak, but instead simply to listen without judgment, to truly understand another person. So permission and intention rather, and permission. That's the way to go. So if you've been thinking about, okay, when was it that I had the last sit down conversation with a colleague or a friend to truly uncover their core values, then maybe this video has given you some start points, really, some ways to kind of look at starting at instigating these powerful conversations. And I'm going offline now. I'm going back, and I will be back again next week with the next reflection in the book to give you some thoughts and ideas around that. But if you've liked this, please let me know what it is you've liked. And if you think this could be useful for other people, then please share it. And if you have not yet started this journey, then think about, actually, what's the one step that I can take today to try and make this world a more inclusive place where those around me, in my networks, whether in my private lives or in my corporate world, can truly feel a sense of inclusion and that they have a place where they belong. And finally, I'm going to leave you with this. If not now, then when? And if not you, then who? So thank you for joining me. If you've any questions, pop it in the chat. But for now, everybody, I've been Jackie Handy. This has been Inclusion Differently, and I will see you again very soon. Bye for now.